What's up, MMA fans on YouTube? I'm sorry for the 11th hour video again, but shit gets in the way sometimes. Forgive the language, but still here to do the video. We're about 7.5 hours away. I cannot wait. This card is pretty loaded. I mean, you even have guys that are definitely used to main card status that have been relegated to the prelims. Andrei Arlovski, most notably, prelims. He's on the last fight of his UFC contract. The UFC's definitely doesn't have a reputation of treating guys very well, especially when they're on the last fight of their contract. Diego Sanchez, Josh Koscheck, even George Grisel has been on some main cards. Now probably going to be the first fight of the night to start off the whole show. But do the main card fights here per usual. I don't know if many of you are the same opinion, but I'd rather see the Jake O'Brien Andrei Arlovski fight than the Heath Herring Cheick Kongo fight. But that's just my opinion. Again, I'm not the matchmaker, so let's get right to it. First fight of the night: Alessio Sakara in his middleweight debut against longtime middleweight Chris Lieben, Ultimate Fighter alum, first season against Sakara, an Italian fighter who's been training in Brazil, has since made the move to American Top Team, fighting against a very, very tough opponent, Chris Lieben, Sakara's first fight at 185, so it's going to be interesting to see how his power and his style translates to the lighter division. If he's a bigger puncher, although he did fight Drew McFedries, they both fought at 205, has since cut down to 185, and Sakara ended up losing that fight. Lieben is coming off a very impressive victory against Terry Martin, where he seemed rocked out of it and just comes back and catches Martin with a big shot of his own. I believe it was a left hook, and knocked him cold. It was a very, very tough fight. Lieben's a very tough fighter. He's only been stopped by via submission against Jason McDonald. Lost obviously pretty brutally to Anderson Silva, as a lot of people have as of late. Also lost to Caleb Starnes in kind of a lackluster decision, but I think Lieben beat Sakara in this fight. Like Lieben said in his post-fight interview, Sakara has shown the ability, or should I say lack thereof, but just he kind of wilts under the pressure when the fight, kind of gets out of position or just isn't going his way. He just kind of turtles up and gives up. Saw it against Houston Alexander, saw it against Drew McFedries. He had McFedries rocked, but McFedries was able to weather it, came back and ended up beating Sakara. So I just think Lieben's got a big chin. Sakara's, like I stated, he's shown that he kind of cracks under the pressure. And I think Lieben's a hard enough puncher himself. He'd catch Sakara with something, maybe knocks him out, or grounds and pounds of victory, probably in the first or second round, Chris Lieben. On to the next fight, Chris Wilson, Team Quest fighter. His first fight in UFC against John Fitch. This is a very tricky fight because they're very similar, actually very similar looking. It's going to be kind of hard to tell who's who in this fight because they're both very in statures and in feature, even in the facial hair. They looked very much alike at the weigh-ins. John Fitch and Chris Wilson. Fitch obviously is on a huge tear in the UFC. He's undefeated in the UFC. He's fighting Chris Wilson, a guy that's is an MMA veteran, Team Quest veteran, but this is his first fight in the UFC. John Fitch is seemingly on the cusp of a welterweight title shot after this GSP Matt Serra fight gets over with. He seems like he's the next guy in line. If he wins this fight, he's that close, and he's definitely, if he goes in there and tears Chris Wilson a new he's definitely ready, and he's probably one of the best guys outside of Carlos Condit. In my opinion, that's going to give GSP the best fight out there at 170 is probably John Fitch and Carlos Condit. Those are the best fights after. If he beats Matt Serra, that's an if. If he beats, those are his best two fights, bar none. But he's got to get past Chris Wilson. It's going to be a tough fight. I think Fitch comes out, starts to feel this fight out. I don't know if he comes out in starts off very quickly, but I see him beating Chris Wilson probably by a submission. He seems to favor the rear naked choke as a submission, probably catches Wilson with a shot, rocks him, gains dominant position, he gets the submission. I give this fight to John Fitch in the probably goes into the second round. I think Wilson will make a go of it. He's trains with a tough camp, but I think Fitch's familiarity with the octagon and just the winning streak he's on, and he knows what's at stake here, he'll win this fight. Now, on to the next fight. Was it's probably the most, outside of obviously Dan Henderson and Anderson Silva, it's the most interesting fight on the card, because here you have a top 10 middleweight in the world, Yushin Okami, who's, he's been fighting a lot of good fighters as of late. Swick, before he cut down to 185, beat Swick handily. He lost a very close decision where he just seemingly didn't do much against Rich Franklin. To later come back, beat Jason McDonald. I'm sorry if I called him Rob McDonald before. I constantly get those two names mixed up. Jason McDonald in this in his last few fights. He's fighting Evan Tanner, and here's a guy we haven't seen in close to 2 years. His last fight was against Justin Levens back at UFC, I think it was 58. Or no, I'm sorry, like 59. Wow, a long time ago. He won that fight, I think, via triangle choke. And he's a former UFC middleweight champion. He's definitely a guy who's trained with a multitude of camps. He's a tough fighter. He's a methodical banger, sort of a guy who will finish a fight more or less ground and pound submission. For a lot of fans who just haven't seen him in a while or just aren't familiar with him, he's definitely a guy that you have to beat up on to stop. He's not a guy you're going to knock out. I mean, Tito Ortiz knocked him out with a huge slam back when he was fighting out of his weight class at 205. He was just oversized and overpowered in that fight. Evan is definitely a goer. Okami is a huge middleweight, as we all know, and they sort of have a similar style, but I think Tanner, they just don't know what we're going to get from him, because this is his first time back in a long time. He did a before and after picture on his website where he took a picture before he started training, I think a day in, and now you see him at the weigh-ins. He looks shredded. He's definitely committed to his conditioning, and Okami's kind of a guy you just don't really know what you're going to get out of him in a fight. Is he going to come out and do what he did against Jason McDonald, or is he going to come out and do what he did against Rich Franklin, where he just really just kind of threw one punch, try to go in and clinch, one punch, go in and clinch, hopefully take the fight to the ground. But Evan's very comfortable on the ground, whether it's from the bottom or on the top. He's definitely has a good triangle. Seen him catch Robbie Lawler in it, caught Justin Levens in it. He's got a good submission game. He's got a good top game. He's a very good ground and pounder, as we've seen against Phil Baroni, David Terrell. So we'll see what happens. It's just such a hard fight to call. I'll give it to Okami right now, just based on his activity level, because Tanner hasn't been in there in 2 years, but Okami obviously has, and he's been fighting. I'll give it to Okami by decision, but my heart would still wants to go with Tanner, but just trying to be as unbiased as possibly. I'll give it to Okami, just split decision to Yushin Okami. Now, on to the next fight, Heath Herring against Czech Congo, and this fight has all the makings of a 3-round grinder, where it's going to be left up to the judges to give this decision to whomever. I think if Herring is able to take this fight to the ground, which we've seen Congo be taken to the ground pretty easily when he's been forced to go there, he goes down pretty quickly. If Herring can get on top of him and start pounding him out, which he should do, maybe Congo gives up a submission. Hopefully Herring takes it, finishes this fight. I don't see any reason why Heath Herring shouldn't win this fight, but Heath Herring is, again, he's like more of a methodical grinder. He just doesn't have one dominant way to finish a fight. He just kind of goes out there and just kind of goes into these wars of attrition with his fights. So in Congo, he's coming off the win to Crow Cop. Crow Cop's really not a cage fighter. He's more of a ring fighter. So I just definitely think he was just out of a fish out of water in the octagon. It's just a completely different fight. Cage versus the ring. People who don't know, definitely it's a definite, just a completely different animal, completely different fight you have in a ring as opposed to a cage. But Congo's is a good striker, a powerful striker. He's a very, he's got that Adonis look to him. Fans seem to like that, but I just don't think he's got a complete enough game to become an elite heavyweight. Herring's been in there with the best of the best. Hopefully he goes out there and shows it, finishes Congo. I'm going to pick Heath Herring in this fight. I'm going to go against my gut and give him a ground and pound stoppage. Hopefully he's learned from the Nogueira mistake, goes out there, catches Congo, gets him to the ground, pounds him out, and we'll see the real Heath Herring. But hopefully we don't see a 3-round bore, which I don't know. I have in my. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but Heath Herring, ground and pound, 2nd round. Now on to the main event. Dan Henderson against Anderson Silva, the champion. He's been obviously he's been putting all his guys to bed. Rich Franklin twice, Lehman decisively, Franklin decisively also. Luter that was probably the fight that he was the most trouble in, was with Travis Luter. Luter is like Dan in that he's a wrestler. Dan is a much better wrestler than Luter, and he's a hell of a lot better of a striker than Luter. So that's the kind of fight that I'm gonna try to draw my conclusion off of. Mark Wirt, obviously Anderson buzzsawed through him. So we really haven't seen Anderson go into the deep water with a guy yet, like a guy like Dan Henderson, where you've got to go through the mill with him. For people who hadn't seen him fight prior, fans that weren't familiar with Pride and his doings in Pride, he's a guy who beat Vanderlei Silva, vicious knockout with a left hook. We saw Silva in his last fight take some of the best shots that Chuck Liddell could throw at him, and he still was standing there. It was a very tough guy to stop, and Dan finished him. So Dan's got some pop in those gloves. A hard fought decision loss to Quentin Jackson there's a guy that KO'd and has beaten Chuck Liddell twice. So look no further than to some of the guys Dan has fought. He's definitely a good fighter. A lot of people just don't know about, like more mainstream fans that aren't familiar with Pride. That's where he did the bulk of his work with MMA. So he's definitely was on the same Olympic team in the Atlanta with Kurt Angle. He's got that pedigree. Obviously, we all know Anderson hasn't lost in quite some time. And this is going to be his toughest fight, I believe, in that time period. Definitely his toughest fight. And Henderson has definitely fought stiffer competition in different weight classes. But it's such a hard fight to call because Anderson is just so fluid on his feet. He's so rhythmic with the striking. It's just like he makes it look so easy. That's how you know he's so good, because he makes it look so he just kind of just throws his hands. It looks so smooth, but it's got so much behind it. And then Henderson he's a thrower. Like, he throws a punch, he's going to take your head off with it. And he's one of those guys that's a scary guy, because it seems like when you hit him hard, it makes him want to hit you harder. He's not a guy you see get rocked a lot. He's never been KO'd in his career. He's never been stopped, although he's been submitted by the Nogueira brothers, who have trained Anderson in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think he received his black belt from them as well. So if Anderson does win this, I think he wins it via submission. Henderson wins this, I think he catches one of two ways. He grounds and pounds Silva, because we saw Luter mount Silva, and I don't think Henderson will get swept as easily as Luter did. He gets on top of Silva, it's gonna be pretty brutal. Or he can I think if he catches Anderson clean with a shot, he'll knock him out. And I don't see this fight going to a decision. We haven't seen Anderson past the second round in a UFC fight, so and we've seen Anderson go pretty hard 5-minute rounds with Quinton Jackson. I think he actually logged more time in that one fight than Anderson has in his whole UFC tenure, which is pretty crazy. But I think I'm gonna go with Dan Henderson in this fight. I think he gets on top of Anderson, pounds him out, or he catches him with a big shot and knocks him out. It's just the way I'm going with this fight. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. We'll see what happens. We've got 7 hours till kickoff, so hopefully it's going to be a great show. Hope everybody enjoys it. I know I'm going to enjoy it. Hope we definitely get to see some undercards tonight. I'm definitely hoping we get to see Arlovsky fight, and possibly, I wouldn't mind seeing Diego, because he's pretty aggressive fighter. Outside of the time he had the staff with Josh, that was the only time we really didn't see him go at it. But otherwise, pretty entertaining fighter. And Hazlett and Koscheck should be a good fight. I'd like to see that as Hazlett's first tough fight in UFC, and it should be a good fight. So until then, you guys have a good one. Take care. Hope UFC 2 lives up to the hype. Take care.